No. I don't think queerness was really talked about at all in any of my classes.
No. If there was anything, it was so minimal that it's lost to me.
I had really great English and history teachers that integrated that into the curriculum. I feel so lucky that I can say my high school curriculum did cover queer historical figures or like queer experiences.
Not a lot really was mentioned for me at high school until they hired this one social justice teacher. They hired her on my very last year of high school.
Not really. I think in 11th grade and it's like AP US history, I think we talked about Stonewall riots a little bit.
We very, very, very lightly touched upon like Marsha P. Johnson and like the AIDS epidemic and how it affected certain queer people and queer communities. That was it.
As far as like the curriculum goes in Georgia, it was very like cookie cutter kind of. I want to say just was like your average like whitewashed teaching of history and American culture. Maybe in the theater class there was some teaching of like queer stuff, but I feel like that's kind of like.
Unless it's a teacher who is an ally or it is quite literally a queer-centered class, or the teacher themselves is queer, usually queerness won't be acknowledged at all, is what I notice.
They did talk about queer people being hunted in the federal government.
Potentially it was mentioned, maybe in like a more US history focus, and then it was, Stonewall or something, but it certainly was an afterthought, much like the mention of anything Hawaiian.
My modern art history class that we talked about it just a little bit, like in the 80s and kind of in the pop culture movement and kind of like how people express themselves there. A lot of art outside of like predominant white artists is kind of like glossed over, even though I'm sure like we all know that Black and like people of color and like queer people have added so much to art and culture.
In my Psych 300 class, my professor talks about it a little bit more, and she actually is, I think she's definitely a lot more, one of those professors where she cares about it a lot more.
I mean, I've taken quite a few that had a small focus on queer and trans topics. There's the obvious introduction to LGBTQ studies. I had to define cisgender for the rest of the students because the professor couldn't explain it in a way that everyone else could understand.
None of the STEM courses I've taken approached queer topics to any particular degree.
It'd be nice to be in a class where you can feel comfortable to be like talking about your own personal relation to things.
That's the big thing, that we have representation. I get very little of that as not just a brown man, but a brown trans man and a disabled brown trans man.
Whenever I hear anything about queer activists, just the hatred that we get, but to hear more about the revolutionary aspect of us.
I think part of it is like I could meet a professor that I could like have a real relationship with and like get to talk to and like not be the only queer person in my class. So that'd be a really cool place to meet other queer students and affirming professors and have another place where you can have community.
I think it would be important for professors to adjust language in their lectures, to account for non-binary people, to account for intersex people.
It's a history that is not often taught, and it's not just about gay people. You know, there's so much more to it that people should know, you know, like there's the elements of like Native people and kind of like understanding queer history from the perspective of the people that you're learning about, you know?
It's the idea of representation, and being able to see yourself in the people that you're learning about, and seeing that queer people have always existed, and being able to trace the stories and the history.
It's definitely super important. I feel like the way I'm feeling, I shouldn't have to feel. If there was a lot more representation, I wouldn't think that assimilating with cisgender people, I would need to do that as a safety if we had more representation.
I would like to learn about specifically people of color, trans people of color, because trans people of color have made so many different marks in the community, and even now they still get treated very poorly compared to other people.
It's important to expose people to queer issues, and I think like in some ways it helps bring people together, even if like an Asian person isn't gay, to understand that like there are the issues that they're going through are also true for an Asian person that is gay, but also that like this is somebody who is in their community.
And it feels kind of stupid to gloss over them, or like it almost feels intentional if you choose not to talk about it in your curriculum. Speaking as someone who I feel does have a lot of privilege, I have to do better to uplift the community as a whole. So you can't really like uplift people if you don't know about them or know about their experiences.
In particular, being Kanakamoli and queer, what that does as a student, right? In the way in which I feel underrepresented as a Native Hawaiian, and the excitement that I would receive from that representation, intentional, authentic representation. You know, I think it would be applicable to the queerness as well, you know, of, you know, just feeling seen.
So it would have made perfect sense to teach about it. Probably would have prevented some of the struggles that some of the other students had, including myself. And it's totally realistic. I mean, we're in society, so why can't we learn about us? We're a real thing.
If a professor decides to add more queer curriculum in, it also shows the students that they are a welcoming environment, so it can help the students feel safer in those classes.
Once you learn queer history, and having a better curriculum that has more queer and like things that are not necessarily like so narrow, I feel like that is the only way really to kind of get like a good foundational change and help people better themselves, you know?
I think it could be important. I think looking like, I'm thinking about like Filipino history specifically when it comes to gender. There is in the at least in Tagalog, the language that I speak, the word for gay is bakla, and it comes as a contraction of the word for boy and girl, babae and lalaki. And prior to colonization, like it was a gender category, and it was something that was celebrated. And I know that that's not entirely limited to the Philippines.
Because there's still so much ignorance, you know. Right now, we got so many right-wing bigots that want to completely erase any sort of teachings of just the fact that, like, we exist and we deserve basic human rights and to be treated as equals. And so they're like, equality. So yeah, I think for all rebellious reasons, we got to continue pushing for queer studies.
I think as a person who's under the trans umbrella, being non-binary and also being a person of color, I think that history also is very important to me, because not only is it about being discriminated against for being trans, but also being a person of color.
It's life-saving. Earlier when I was talking about coming out as trans, what did I say? It took one friend, one representation of me to help me be who I was. I would have killed myself had I not come out. Like, had I not finally come to understand that I could be who I wanted to be, I would not be here right now. A class that says, hey, there's this trans person who did this thing. Doesn't matter what it is. This trans person did this thing. You can do this thing. This trans person existed. You can exist. That's a huge statement, but it could genuinely save someone's life. And so I can't imagine why you wouldn't include queer and trans topics. What do we lose by including them? What is gained by excluding them?